All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, February 28th, the last day of February. And of course, February will not leave without reminding us that it's still winter with some snow. You'll notice that our guests tonight, all of you in the audience, are not able to share your screens or unmute. And that's simply because this is a webinar type event. We don't actually have the webinar platform, but this is the closest we could get to having our hosts be able to share information with you. And at the end, there'll be an opportunity for a Q&A, and all of that will go through the chat box and we'll be facilitating and moderating the questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone. I'm Beth McCoy. I'm the Superintendent of Schools. I'm also joined by Denny Conklin, Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Kate McCarthy, Director of Student Services, and Dr. Carlos Hoyt, DS Class of 78, who is serving in our capacity as DEI Consultant. So the four of us will be in charge of providing as much information this evening as possible. We'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and learn more about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the Dover-Sherburne schools. This is our third of at least 4 scheduled community forums. The first one was held in November. We had another one in January. And in each one, we've tried to pivot to meet the needs of the audience. So for example, at the last forum, it was clear that there were a lot of questions and people felt that they would benefit from hearing the answers as a group. So we pivoted to more of a town hall type forum. And then there were still so many questions coming out of that event. We thought that this one would best be served to be able to provide a whole lot of data, research, information to all of you with opportunities for questions at the end. As you see, this evening is being recorded, and this video will be shared out widely for anybody in the Dover, Sherburne, and Boston community who would like to view it at a different time or again, or go back and review questions. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right, we'll get started here. Okay, so our agenda for this evening is just a welcome and an overview. Then we're going to talk about the what of what is DEI and what are the district's goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. The why are we doing this work, including the mandates from both local, state, and federal officials, as well as the research and data that supports why this work is important. We'll talk about the how this evening in terms of what does this look like in the classroom? What does it look like for kids? What does it look like for teachers? What can we expect to see moving forward? And then the how, as well, the budget. That's been a big question of how are we funding this? How much does it cost? And we'll cover that later in the presentation. We'll give you a brief preview of next steps and then go into the question and answer period, which will be at the very end with an option to ask questions in a form as well. If we don't have time to get to your question, you'll be able to submit them and we will certainly get back to you. So just to do a quick review of our work to date. Just as the pandemic started, prior to that, I should say, the district had started work around diversity, equity, and inclusion under Dr. Keogh's leadership. The pandemic then happened, and coming into June of 2020, we are aware of the George Floyd murder. And as a response, Dr. Keogh had sent a message to the community acknowledging the act and talking that we needed to come together to do more and better as a not only society, but as a community. What really pushed him to initiate creating a group of students, alumni, parents, educators, and community members around the idea of equity was a letter that we received that was signed by multiple alumni of the Dover-Sherburne Public Schools, identifying as a wide range of individuals. And I'm just going to read a quick part of this. So this was from June of 2020. As an institution that has long held itself as a leading college preparatory school, boasting scores and a successful body of alumni, it is imperative to introduce not only anti-racist policies and training sessions for students, but faculty as well. Racial equity courses and programming on the reach of institutional racism must become the norm in all communities, and our community must do better. We should feel pressure to develop methods of teaching students to navigate, recognize, and promote racial inclusivity, cultural competency, and anti-racist dialogue. We are equally responsible for helping our students build the capacity to understand and confront racism, as well as contribute to a society where peace and justice prevail. As alumni and community members of Dover-Sherburne Regional School District, there are 3 immediate actions we call on our schools to take. First, require additional teaching faculty education programs this summer. Second, begin a documented effort to research how to successfully and sensitively implement anti-racist training and courses for students and faculty. And third, create an interim diversity and inclusion committee dedicated to this matter, which can establish itself as an integral part of Dover-Sherburne schooling and begin addressing these issues immediately. So as part of the timeline you'll see here, coming out of June's events and this letter from alumni, we formed DSA, which was this group, again, of multi-stakeholders coming together to think about equity in the Dover-Sherburne schools and community and how we can do better in those regards. Having worked as a DSA team through the fall of 2020, we realized that there were certainly efforts we could make, but we didn't know where we were starting. What is our baseline? What sense of belonging do our students already have? How are our students achieving in all different subgroups? And realized that we really needed additional data. Certainly we have data that we track as a district, and we have anecdotal data that we hear from students and parents and alumni, but we really wanted someone to capture a snapshot of where we were as a district. And hence we partnered with NYU. And during the 2021-2022 school year, they conducted an equity audit that involved bringing focus groups together and doing surveys across various students, parent, community member, and alumni groups. Fast forward to September of 2022, which was only 6 months ago, they presented their findings and recommendations at a school committee meeting, which brings us into this past fall, where Denny and myself worked with the leadership team, all 4 faculties and DSA to look at those recommendations, the faculties as experts in education to say, do these make sense for the Dover-Sherburne schools? And what do we feel like is reasonable to accomplish now, later, down the road, and maybe never? That brings us to the winter of 2022 in the gray box, and we are again on the 3rd of 4 community forums. And after March 30th, should we need additional forums, we can certainly schedule more. The idea being that in April, Denny and I, in our strategic planning process as new superintendents, will be laying out a strategic plan, or at least the framework for a strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years. That certainly will incorporate aspects of what you're about to hear this evening, but also focus on the larger picture of academics in general and preparing our students for life in the 21st century around facilities, resource efficiency, and all of those things. So that said, given this journey, we're going to take a few minutes to share some reflections, and I'd like to ask Dr. Hoyt to share his reflections first.
All right, can you hear me okay? Awesome. I just put in the chat, hopefully successfully, a link to the document that I'll be reading from right now. I did jot down some notes regarding having this opportunity to share what I'm observing as I return to my community. So with no further ado, observations on my community in this time of change. And there are 3 parts to this. Part 1, what has changed? I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had to become reacquainted with my alma mater, whether through individual dialogue with the many generous parents who shared their views, working with Beth and Denny, which has just been delightful and inspirational, workshopping with teachers or the school committee members, facilitating the equity audit, or the DEI doubts discussion, or the newly launched Parenting for Inclusion group. I chose to come to DS as a 12-year-old and stay here through graduation because I wasn't being challenged in my neighborhood schools. By coming here, I got what I was seeking in terms of academic challenge and much more. I experienced a profound broadening of horizon and a sense of belonging to more than one place or people. In fact, I ended up seeing that I have the right to feel I belong in all places and with all people. Here, I experienced kinds of diversity I could not have known had I stayed in my neighborhood schools. Here, I benefited from equitable efforts to achieve equality of opportunity. And here, with all humility aside, I embodied the proof that diversity, equity, and inclusion need not conflict with academic excellence. Upon returning to DS, I wondered what changes I would detect from my era to the current one. After all, that's a long period of time in between. As I am re-immersing, I'm proud and pleased to see that producing top-notch scholars remains job number one at DS, as it was when I was there. And I'm proud and pleased to see that doing so with a robust sense of community remains an inextricable part of the goal. So what's changed? We live in a time of increased and intensified vigilance regarding how the dynamics of social identity, social bias, and social justice factor into efforts to design and deliver education that results in optimal success, growth, and joy for all students. This increased attention to providing inclusive and equitable education has led to the exploration and creation of ways to most meaningfully think about what is currently referred to using a constellation of terms that didn't exist when I was at DS. Terms like DEI, SEL, culturally responsive teaching, anti-bias education, and more. The emergence of these enhancers of education has been greeted with great relief and happiness by many parents and students. And it has led to questions, concerns, worry, and out resistance on the part of some parents and students. But this is a change of degree, not of kind. School remains school, education remains education. We continue to talk about what is the best way to educate. What's the most effective way to teach math? How many and which languages should students learn? What's the best academic schedule for balancing the sleep needs of teens, the amount of time we need to nurture academic excellence, and the amount of time needed for sports after school, or for the arts and other crucial forms of learning that catalyze pro-social growth? These questions, translatable from era to era, have always and perhaps will always characterize education. They have always and should always be met with curiosity and scrutiny by those who provide education and by those to whom and for whom education is provided. What are the best ways to teach math, the languages, reading, science, basketball, the arts, that maximize content-related outcomes and positive personal growth for the widest range of an intentionally diverse student body? Is that a new set of questions, a new enterprise, a new mission? Or is it the same old question? How should we teach to get the outcomes we want for the students we teach? Iterated for these times. Part two then, how are people responding to this moment of change? A couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of doing some work with DSL leaders. And during part of our workshop, I offered the following thought exercise regarding the distribution of responses or dispositions regarding DEI. And during that exercise, I offered up 8 rough categories. There are some folks who are grateful, for our investment in DEI work and are eager to help in any way they can. There are some folks who run on a continuum from curious to skeptical, who want to know, why are we doing this? There are some folks also, same spectrum, curious to skeptical, who want to know, how can we do this in a non-zero sum game way? How can we do this in a way that doesn't give to one thing and automatically take away from another thing? And typically the general concern is, if we do DI, are we detracting from academic excellence? There are some folks, again, curious to skeptical, who want to know the what. What exactly will be done in terms of curriculum, materials, in my child's class every day? There are some folks who are worried and weary, W-A-R-Y. And these folks can be roughly divided into a couple of categories. One category might express itself by saying, my personal beliefs feel at odds with aspects of inclusive education. And most often these aspects concern gender, sexual orientation, race, and sexuality, but those aren't the only ones. And a second subcategory might express its concerns by saying, I've heard of or I've had bad experiences with DEI. And finally, a category of those who just seem opposed to the inclusivity mandate itself. And these folks aren't so much seeking to find a common ground as to just stop what they consider to be a problematic enterprise. The questions that I offered in conjunction with these categories were these. What's your sense of the percentage of parents at your school who are in each category? What's your sense of the percentage of teachers at your school who are in each category? What's your sense of the percentage of students at your school who are in these categories? What's the percentage of our school leaders? And I meant the folks in the room who are in these categories. Where are you truly? And finally, what do you need to feel optimally equipped to respond inclusively and equitably to every person in any dispositional subgroup at your school? Because if we're going to have diversity, we have to accept that there's diversity of views around DEI as well. No surprise, a rich and candid and compassionate discussion ensued. Some highlights of that discussion included the importance of thinking inclusively about the diversity of dispositions regarding DEI and everything in an intentionally diverse community, which we are. The need to be as constructively responsive as possible to everyone in the community, no matter what category they're in. And clarifying what the best response is to folks who fear that attention to DEI detracts from necessary attention to academic excellence, folks who hold personal beliefs that feel in conflict with some aspects of DEI-related education and practices, and folks who don't so much have questions to aspects of DEI, but object to what they perceive to be DEI in general. Which leads to part 3, DEIAE, achieving a healthy tension and recognizing and reckoning with fundamental disagreement. I shared during our discussion that I think it's incumbent on us to learn if there is any actual empirical data that evidences a cause and effect or even a high correlational relationship between integrating DEI into education and the diminishment of academic excellence. And that whether there is or not, we have the opportunity to show what research has already confirmed, that diverse communities properly supported in terms of equity and inclusion prosper. Lately, I've been wondering if we should refer to DEI in education, not just as DEI, but as DEIAE, where the AE stands for academic excellence, in order to emphasize the fusion of DEI and academic excellence and help disabuse folks of the fiction that these things are in conflict. I think about the seeming conflict between personal views and some aspects of DEI education as a kind of tension between personal belief and public tolerance. And I suggest that the best way to keep that tension as healthy as possible is to acknowledge it, to remind ourselves that we all successfully navigate the tension anytime we're in a public space where all are welcome, and offer support to those who might benefit from help with managing the tension in the public space of DS schools. Regarding those who wish to have what they take to be DEI just go away, I observe that it's better to acknowledge that as a fundamental disagreement. As has been said so many times in so many ways, and will be said again tonight, we have to provide equitable and inclusive education to our intentionally diverse student body. We don't have a choice about that. We do choose to do all we can to help everyone understand that and find their way towards cooperating and collaborating in our efforts to do it as well as possible. But we can't choose not to do it. So I observe my community, our community, at this juncture where at some point, the grappling with the why needs to move into, hey, let's really talk about the how and the what, because we have some exciting stuff to share with you. But we have to do what we've been talking about doing since before the equity audit, I'm sure, but things have gone into sort of bright relief ever since then. And I can remain happy and proud to be part of that in this community as it grapples with it. So thanks for a moment to share those observations.
Thank you, Dr. Hoyt. I will share a few reflections. Thank you, Carlos. On behalf of Denny and myself, who have been working with Carlos and Kate and many of our leaders and school committee members throughout this process, just in terms of some of the things that we've heard from parents and community members that we want to acknowledge and hopefully address tonight. Certainly in our efforts to address the needs of students coming out of the pandemic and in our efforts to be transparent and communicative around SEL and DEI work so that we're not hiding anything and we're sharing what it is that we're doing with kids and what we're thinking. It's come to our attention that unfortunately, all of the amazing work that our students and teachers do in the classrooms every single day hasn't been on the front page of our newsletters for a while. So the principals, myself, Denny, are going to make sure that we begin to highlight again all of those things that are happening. They're certainly not in the background at all. They're in the forefront of what happens in our schools, and we want to make sure that they're in the forefront of our communications as well. People have asked that we reference data beyond the NYU report that supports the need for DEI work in our schools, and we'll do that certainly this evening, as well as some of the research that supports the need for work around belonging, student engagement, and seeing the students seeing themselves in the curriculum. Questions about what is this cost and where is the money coming from? We'll address those this evening. We've heard, certainly a reminder to take a measured approach with this work. I hope that I take a measured approach with all of the work that I do as a superintendent, but I will certainly do the same here. And as we move forward and as the district highlights, what it is that matters to us in terms of how do we define success and how do we define achievement as a district, we want to monitor that data carefully and thoughtfully and regularly, as that's actually one of the questions in my entry form is trying to get from the community a sense of what we want to keep on the dashboard as we move forward and continue to monitor our work. And lastly, one of the questions that often comes up is, well, why have our rankings dropped? Dover-Sherburne used to be #1 in Boston Magazine, and why are we now #9? So just to address that question and kind of get that out of the room so we can focus on the teaching and learning that happens in our classroom and what that looks like, I will share this slide. So on the right, you'll see the contributing factors that go into our Boston Magazine ranking, as well as that in US News and World Report. What's difficult about these two magazines is that from year to year, the equations and the factors that they use don't always stay the same. So even if a school district were to try to say, we want to improve our SAT scores, or we want to, change this about our school, nothing says that that same factor is going to be used the following year. So it's kind of difficult to, if you want, game the system. The second point to be made is that Dover-Sherburne has been part of the Challenge Success program now for almost 10 years. We were the first school on the East Coast to join the Stanford University program. And I was a parent then, not yet an educator in the district. And the reason that we did that is we felt that our students, similar to those in Silicon Valley and in our comparable districts, were under a lot of pressure to achieve, and that there seemed to be a single definition of success, that you had to go through the high school, take as many AP courses as possible, and get into the most esteemed college you could. So Challenge Success was brought in to kind of focus on the whole child, reset our compasses in terms of making sure that students are, yes, achieving academically, but are also happy and healthy in the process. That said, part of what Challenge Success has taught us is that there are multiple routes to college, career, and life. And sometimes that might involve a gap year. Sometimes that might involve some community service after graduation. Sometimes that might be going into the military or a trade. And so as those things happen, our attending college rates are going to shift. But that has been a choice by the district to make sure students know that attending a 2 or 4 year college isn't the only choice, although it continues to be the most popular one. Educator evaluations have been used in the equation in the last few years, which are not calibrated from district to district. So there are rubrics by which we evaluate our educators and our leaders, myself and Denny included, and what one principal might see as exemplary for a chemistry teacher, in another district, they might see as proficient. So it's difficult to calibrate. It's not a clear ruler like a standardized test is. We tend to believe that we have incredibly talented teachers here in the Dover-Sherburne schools. We hold them to high expectations, but not every teacher is exemplary every year, because we want, just like ourselves, to continue to grow and learn. And that is a factor. The more exemplary teachers you have rated, the higher your score is in the magazines. We continue to encourage, as Mr. Smith would say from the high school, as many students as possible to take at least one AP course, if not several, when they're in the high school. But as we encourage students to take those AP courses, we might not always see 4s and 5s on the exams. And that's okay. We want our students to get a taste of what college is like, to challenge themselves, to learn the coping strategies, to work through difficult materials and persist. But we have to also be ready to accept that the scores might shift a little bit, and that will affect our ranking. Lastly, I'd like to thank Kate McCarthy, who happens to be on the screen, and all of her work with the special education department. As a district, we've decided that it's important to keep as many of our Dover and Sherburne kids in our district as possible. Certainly, unfortunately, there are students that we can't meet their needs. because they are so extensive and we have to send them to out-of-district placements. But really in the last several years, we've been doing our best to maintain our students and keep our students here in our schools and specialized programs, or even bring them back from out-of-district placements so that they can be educated with their neighbors and their peers. Doing that comes with just some changes in that not all of our students are going to graduate from high school in 4 years. Not all of our students are going to excel on a standard MCAS exam, and not all of our students are going to go right to college. Again, those factor into our rankings. So it's really important that we think as a district what matters to us. If we want to challenge kids into taking advanced courses, if we want to challenge teachers to be their best, if we want our students that we know and love and are our neighbors to stay here in our schools, then that's something that we are agreeing to and have to be okay with how that might affect our rankings in the long run. That said, the rankings themselves can be a little bit deceitful. So this year, while we're ranked number 9, if you actually rank schools by category, Dover-Sherburne continues to be number 1 in MCAS English, number 2 in MCAS Math in the state, number 1 in AP Proficiency. And unfortunately, the SAT reading math scores that they have listed are incorrect. We're not the only district to notice that this year. And our attending college rate is reported very incorrectly. We actually had 97% of our students last year go straight to college. It's reported at 80.6. So that has, I'm sure, brought our ranking down. What's difficult is even if we ourselves insert these numbers and try to re-rank, we don't know if other districts' information is correct either. So we don't know if there would be movement among them if this information was corrected. So just wanted to get that out there. I know it's a burning question, and now we'll move on.
Thank you, Beth. I had a chance to see that slide, obviously, in preparing for this, and I was just so pleased and proud about my school. When I went here, I have an older sister, and my folks didn't have a whole lot of money. So she went to a private school. And because I couldn't go to a private school, we looked for other alternatives. And I was lucky enough to get into Medco and obviously go to DS. And I think I still tell my sister that I went to a better school than she did. So it's nice to see that we are still the school we are. So with all that said, just to sort of clarify tonight's objectives, we hope to do the best we can to provide specifics on the goals of this work, the mandates, and the data behind the mandate, its practical application in the school setting, and the measures by which we will hold ourselves accountable to maintaining the tradition of excellence for which DS is known. Obviously, I hope some of that is still in progress, but we are happy to do the best we can to show you where we are and what we're looking forward to going as we continue to do this work amongst ourselves as leaders and hopefully with as many folks in the community as possible.
Beth, can I just say one thing, or Denny, before you start? So I'm actually going to be managing the chat. So when you go to chat, if people could pick my name to send the chat to, I'll be collecting all of the questions for the question and answer section. Thank you.
Great reminder, Kate. So yeah, if you go into chat, you want to do the pull down in the little blue box and find Kate McCarthy. And Kate will be gathering questions between now and the end of our webinar for our Q&A session at the end. So that brings us to thinking about what is the what are we doing here? And we thought a really good place to start would be by going over the definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion. And this term DEI has kind of gained its own meaning in our society. It's come with a lot of political connotations. And we think it's really important to go back to the heart of what we mean to establish that common language for what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always believe that if other people have done things really well, then you should help yourselves to things that they've come up with. So these definitions I found from the National Association of Independent Schools and kind of adapted them from the ones that Dedham Public Schools came from. But when we think about diversity, the thing that we're thinking about with diversity is just understanding that every one of our students brings their own unique experiences, strengths, and ideas to our classroom. When we think about equity, we want to make sure that all of our students have what they need in order to have equal access to opportunities that are going to give them the best possible chance to be successful. When we think about inclusion, it is making sure that we are showing behaviors that show our students that they are accepted, respected, and valued. So these are really the base definitions that we're using when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, again, sometimes because we go back to this acronym of DEI, people forget what these words actually stand for and what they mean. And I've said too that, in its essence, what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about engaging all of our students, making sure that when our kids show up to school every day, that we're finding all the inroads to be able to engage them and help make them successful. So to me, that's what this work all boils down to.
Thank you. So when we talk about the what and what are our goals and what is it that we're hoping to accomplish with DEI, I think it's important to think about the journey that we've been on. As I mentioned, we've been a Challenge Success School for coming up on 10 years. In 2019, we launched the Academic Innovation Committee, which mirrored previously the Academic Excellence Committee, about thinking, how do we prepare our students for a world where we can't even imagine the problems that they're going to face and the solutions they're going to have to come up with. So we're going to take a little step back in time, pre-pandemic. I realized that there is a new cohort of elementary parents who were not part of Challenge Success in the beginning, who might not understand what the portrait of a graduate is. So we want to rewind, walk you through those things a little bit so you can hear the themes, hear the goals, and then we'll explain how diversity, equity, inclusion work ties in perfectly with those goals and kind of takes it to the next level in terms of preparing our students for the future. So, quick video to share.
Dover-Sherburne is an outstanding school system. Know that we're leaders and that others will follow our lead, and we want to be on the cutting edge. We want our kids to come out better prepared than anyone else in the world. The strategic learning process developed out of my entry to Dover-Sherburne. I interviewed as many stakeholders as I could possibly find: staff, students, family members, community members, as well as conducted a great deal of research into how our students were performing. Those findings served as the basis of our strategic plan, and the two focal points were the social emotional well-being of our students and empowering our students to be more involved in the learning experiences.
We live in a society that really emphasizes academic achievement. It's come at the risk of creating students who are really good at doing school, and sometimes at the cost of their own health and happiness. Challenge Success has changed Dover-Sherburne in a number of ways. It's brought parents and teachers together to have conversations and to think about our homework guidelines, how our students are tested and how we allow them to demonstrate their learning, how we use their time, both playtime and downtime, and really trying to develop more balanced students who see the bigger picture.
We are thinking about their levels of happiness, their ability to work with others and to feel good about themselves, to know their place in the world. Who will I be and where will I fit in? When we think about the social emotional well-being of our kids, we want them to know who they are and where they're going to fit in the world. And we want them to be content with who they are. We also know that our students need to be engaged learners. They need to be empowered to participate in the learning and to really steer the learning. And instead of being in classrooms where the teacher is the center of the learning, in fact, the teacher is the facilitator of the learning, and the students are doing the experimentation and the experiencing of the learning.
What we need to give our kids is opportunities to try things, to fail, to learn, to explore their passions so that they can find purpose. So our role in the classroom becomes more like that of a coach than a teacher. It's more about what our kids are going to be able to know and to do. So we need to empower them beginning in kindergarten to be able to sort of be masters of their own learning.
The innovative classroom design really allowed us to break away from that old traditional model where students were sitting in rows, and we were allowed to break up the space and really create these really cool spaces. Like students are on the floor now, students are at standing desks, students are really empowered to make decisions within the classroom that allows for their best learning.
Kids are learning it's not all about grades. It's about learning how to work together, learning how to set a goal and work towards it and reflect on your progress as you grow and develop as a learner.
The Academic Innovation Committee was made up of a wide cross-section of people from the entire school community, teachers, administrators, students, parents, and these were all people that came together who have a passion and dedication to Dover-Sherborne and to educating our children. And they brought all of their ideas together to create this portrait of a graduate for what we feel are the essential skills and characteristics of a graduate of the Dover and Sherborne Public Schools.
Critical thinking being analyzing information and coming up with innovative ways to problem solve. Communication, being able to communicate your ideas with thoughts and others as well as listen to others.
Meganoid. Dance.
Collaboration, working as a team with a shared goal.
When I graduate from DS, I want to know how to use teamwork. I want to know how to collaborate, how to listen, how to negotiate with others.
Creativity, thinking outside the box to solve real life problems.
With art, with students, it's so process driven. The whole lesson is an experiment. What happens if I put this line here? What happens if I put this line there? So it's all about them working it through themselves. It's their work and they're working it through themselves. It's not me telling them what to do. They are the problem solvers.
Citizenship, to be aware of that you are part of both small communities and large communities and be active in your classroom, your school, your community, as well as the world.
I watched a TV program about global warming and it really inspired me to bring posters to school to tell my friends that they've got to do something about saving the Arctic.
Resiliency, teaching students that obstacles are something they can learn and grow from and being able to bounce back from those struggles.
Kindness means to me that people know what the right thing to do is, and if they choose not to do it, that's fine, but I feel like everybody should try to step in when they can.
We can only guess what the world's going to look like, but we know it's changing rapidly. We want our kids to be critical thinkers who can problem solve and kind of respond to these increasing and rapid changes.
The fact is the tools that we use today and the problems we have today are probably completely different than the tools that'll be out there in 2035 or the problems that'll be out there in 2035. So we have to create human beings who have that ability to solve the problems themselves because the tools will always be different.
We're engaging the community in conversations around next steps. We're sharing the process and the findings from the Innovation Committee with all 4 faculties, with student and parent and community groups across the district. And the goal of these conversations is to collect feedback and ideas to help us bring the portrait to life.
We can't educate students for the future of work and most importantly, life in systems built for the past. We need to educate students in systems built for the future. As leaders in education, the team at DS is well positioned to help build these new systems for the future.
Thank you. So watching that video, again, you see some old and familiar faces, but it tells the story of the last several years. And I'm hopeful that you can see some of these themes and continued goals for our district coming out of that video and moving forward. The first is around academic excellence. That has been a goal for decades and decades, including when my husband and his siblings graduated from DS, when Carlos graduated from DS. So we really want to ensure that our students achieve at high levels of academic proficiency across a wide range of types of assessments. The second you probably heard was that not only do they need to master content, but they also need to master important skills and competencies. You know, it's one thing to know the information, it's another to be able to do something with it. And as we know, in the age of Google and Siri, information is at our fingertips. So how do we use that to solve problems? So hence, we want to make sure that we are encouraging all of our students to develop these 7 competencies that you heard depicted in the portrait of a graduate. In a spirit of challenge success, you heard that we want to continue to nurture students' social and emotional health in support of the whole child. We want to make sure that students are ready and able to learn so that their psychological and physiological needs have to be met before they're able to do that. And most importantly, at the end of the day, of course, our goal as a system is to prepare students for success in a diverse, rapidly changing world. You heard that hopefully in the video, that we can't imagine what 2035 is going to look like, let alone 2065. So we want to make sure our students have the skills to navigate and make the world a better place as they move forward. So DEI is kind of the next step beyond Challenge Success, beyond Portrait of a Graduate, to help us make sure that we are preparing students for that diverse, rapidly changing world, and that we're accomplishing all 4 of these goals for all of our students, regardless of their identity. So what does that look like? We want to structure learning to build on students' strengths, interests, backgrounds, and prior knowledge. We all know that when you are interested in something, when it connects to prior knowledge in your brain, that it's more likely to solidify and become part of who you are moving forward. So we certainly want to make sure that we are connecting students' synapses to new information for deep learning. We want to make sure that we're allowing students to connect with their learning in textbooks or learning online or learning in classroom to real, authentic problems in the world, so that they understand why this is important and then can practice those skills of application and problem solving. We wish to expose children to rich, diverse texts so that they can hear a wide range of voices, so they can see themselves in books and textbooks, so they can learn about other people and their perspectives who don't necessarily look like themselves, to promote, again, those critical thinking and analysis skills. Cooperative learning is certainly something that's at the forefront of education these days. And certainly we do not want all day, every day to be group work, because it comes with its challenges as well. But we do want to make sure that we are providing students opportunities for both independent work and cooperative learning, so that they can develop the collaborative and interpersonal skills that we know are important for college and work. Our teachers are working on differentiating their instructional practices. When they have a classroom of 18 or 22 learners, there are several that are on benchmark, on grade level benchmark, and moving right along. There are sometimes students in the classroom that are beyond the learning standards and need to be stretched and encouraged to apply and to grow as well. And of course, we have students with various learning styles and needs who might need some support as well. So how can we provide our teachers with the tools in their toolboxes to meet a wider range of learners in their classroom? We also want to make sure that students have multiple access points to rigorous coursework. So as you know, at this point, Dover-Sherburne students are leveled in math in 6th grade. And then when they get to high school, they have choices of leveling in math, English, social studies, science, and world language. We just want to make sure that the only on-ramp to rigorous courses isn't in 6th grade and isn't in 9th grade, that if a child continues to push themselves and develop as a learner, that they can perhaps take an upper level math course when they're in 11th grade, or upper level history course as a senior, that it's not just one track to get to that finish line. In terms of the belonging piece, what does this look like in practicality? We want to make sure that we have programming to meet students' academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs. Academically, we provide small group instruction for students on a regular basis. We have academic learning centers for students with individualized programs. At the middle school and high school, we have H block, flex block. The elementary level, we have win blocks. So making sure that we have time for students to stretch or be supported in their learning. In terms of the social emotional piece, we've added coaches and interventionists at the elementary level. We have guidance counselors, adjustment counselors all throughout our system. And again, through the special education program, have provided additional specialized programs around social emotional learning in the form of the Goals program, Grit and Bridge. And then of course, behaviorally, our educators are supportive of students making good decisions and learning from bad choices always, as are our guidance counselors. And of course, we have added a plethora of behavior specialists to support in that work as well. We want to promote a climate of kindness and respect, so that no matter who is sitting next to a child or who they interact with, there is a minimal level of tolerance and hopefully a level of respect and kindness that happens throughout the school day. That said, we know sometimes with children, things happen. So when there are cases of bullying or bias-based incidents, that students know how to be up standards, that educators feel comfortable addressing it, to make it a learning moment, and be able to move on from that incident where everybody feels good about it. We want to increase opportunities for student reflection, relationship building, and community repair in response to incidents. I won't go too much into detail because we'll cover this later. But in addition to traditional consequences such as detentions and suspensions, which certainly will stay in terms of some infractions, we certainly know that making a mistake is an opportunity for learning. And we want to make sure that when a child perhaps offends another child, there is an opportunity to repair that relationship and find a way forward for the remainder of time that they're going to be together in school. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're diversifying our staff to reflect our increasingly diverse community, and both research and anecdotal evidence in Dover-Sherburne shows that when students can see themselves in the adults that they interact with, it really encourages their learning. It promotes their academic achievement. So we want to make sure that all of our students can see themselves in the staff within our buildings. So now we'll move to the why. Denny.
So I think we have a really good foundation now for what exactly diversity, equity, and inclusion entails. And now just thinking about why is this something that the district is focusing on very specifically right now. I think it's important to just reiterate, and we've discussed this in other forums and certainly in the question and answers document, so I'm going to kind of skim through it. But we have both laws and mandates that talk about the reasons why this work is necessary and why we have to do this work. Being the former history teacher that I am, we have the laws, and laws are things that have been passed down by the legislative branch, and we have mandates, and those are things that have passed down from the executive branch. But either way, whether it's a law or a mandate, they're both things that are important for us to follow through on. I think it's important to start with the fact that just the district as a whole has articulated that these are important issues to focus on. The school committee has given a statement about equity. And of course, our mission statement is to inspire, challenge, and support all of our students. Beyond that, there are a plethora of other ways and mandates that are coming down from us. I think most teachers are starting with the DESI curriculum frameworks, which lay out the main topics and the main skills that we want students to be exposed to in those curriculum frameworks. They talk about issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. DESI, the Department of Education, has also come out with guides on culturally responsive teaching and what is the expectation of our schools in promoting culturally responsive teaching. Things such as making sure that the curriculum has a wide variety of perspectives and viewpoints and identities in it. Our educator evaluation system, which was mentioned earlier, has standards and has pieces built into the teacher and the educator rubric that talk about the importance of belonging and creating inclusive classroom environments where students are having conversations about differences, having conversations about their identities, their experiences. So that's a piece where we are actually rating our teachers and evaluating them on their ability to foster those environments for students. In addition to this, we have accountability measures that are holding us accountable for all those mandates that you just saw in the previous two slides. So we have the Department of Education's Office of Public School Reporting. So we do reviews every 6 years called tiered focusing monitoring in special education, in our English learner program, as well as civil rights. And we're responsible for uploading documents to DESI to show that we are in accordance with a lot of these laws and these mandates. DESI sends representatives come do interviews with teachers to really make sure that we are following along on our promise, specifically when it comes to special ed, when it comes to our English language learners, and when it comes to civil rights, that we're following through on these things. DESI collects data on issues related to belonging, students feeling safe in school, students feeling connected to school through what is called the views on climate and learning, the vocal data. That data is collected through students when they take the MCAS. Clearly, academically, we're held accountable through the MCAS system. So one of the things that the state looks out for is this idea of significant disproportionality. So do we have an overrepresentation of a certain group within special education? And then if that happens, a district has to address that, and they have to put into place a plan to address that significant disproportionality. And there's the NEASC, our New England Accreditation of Schools and Colleges, to keep us as an accredited institution. There are specific measures and there are specific things that they lay out for us in order for us to keep our NEASC accreditation. Along with this is the plethora of data that we have. And as Beth mentioned earlier, the NYU Equity Audit was one set of data. But what's important to do is to make sure that we're triangulating our data, corroborating our data, and showing that a lot of the things that we are discussing when it comes to the what and the how and the why of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work are supported by specific data points. So you can see that in addition to the equity audit, we're collecting information from a wide variety of sources. And again, sitting down, looking at it and seeing where there's overlaps and seeing what those overlaps in the data are telling us and trying to see what story that data is telling us. So we're just going to highlight some of it. We're going to share these slides with people as well so that you can go back and you can look more specifically at it. But when we're thinking about the why, I think it's important, as Beth was talking about earlier, with living in a very diverse and ever-changing world, to note that the demographics in Sherborne and Dover are changing. So again, my history nerd self pulled out census data from 2010 and 2020. And you can see in this data that the racial demographics of both Dover and Sherborne are changing and becoming more diverse. You can see as well that when we think about another type of diversity, which is, thinking about the LGBT community, that when we're thinking about states that have the highest percentage of households with same-sex couples, Massachusetts falls at number 4. So we know that in our state, in our communities, we have increasingly diverse makeups of families. So these are just 2 data points that I pulled from the census to show the way that the world around us and our community is changing and evolving demographically. Some other data points that are really important, just realizing that not all of our students are achieving at all levels. And what we want to really focus on with this diversity, equity, and inclusion work is making sure that we can't predict a student's success based upon any type of demographic area. And what we're seeing and going through the data is that there are some cases where you actually can. We can see when we pulled our enrollment data that we have students with disabilities, low-income students, our African-American and Black students, and our METCO students are underrepresented in honors and AP classes compared to what their total population is. You can see some data here on the average advanced placement scores. And the next slide, you can see a little bit for what the state is reporting in terms of advanced course completion at the high school. And again, here you can see highlighted in the red that our high needs, our students with disabilities, and our African-American and Black students are completing much less advanced coursework than some of their peers and some of their counterparts. Specifically, what has been interesting is also looking at what type of advanced coursework our students are completing. There's a much higher percentage of students completing math advanced coursework than ELA, and that's even more pronounced when we look at our male students, our high need students, our students with disabilities, and our African-American and our Black students. So that's another data point. Obviously, our MCAS data is another way that we look and try to see how our students are doing. And again, when we look at these different demographic groups, we can see that there are more of our African-American and Black students, Latino and Hispanic, high needs, students with disabilities, and our low-income students that are on the MCAS and the ELA and math, getting more of the not meeting expectations and partially meeting expectations categories than again, when we compare it to all of our students within the district. And you can see a similar trend in the next slide when we think about grade 10. So again, this gets back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that with our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we want to make sure that we can't look at a student, one part of a student's identity, and be able to make a prediction about what kind of courses they're going to take or what their achievement might be on a state test, and that we're providing students with what they need to be successful and challenged. Some data that we've pulled on belonging, about making sure that all of our students are able to access learning, because we know that when students feel comfortable in their classrooms, in their buildings, they're best able to learn. These were statistics that were taken from the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, asking students if they feel close to people at school, if they feel like they're part of the school. And we can see here both at the middle school and the high school that our non-white students, our LGBTQ plus students, and our students with disabilities are saying more often or less likely to report that they feel close to people at the school or feel like they're part of the school. It's also important to look at mental health statistics as well and making sure that our students can access learning. We can see from our mental health information from the middle school and the high school from the Metro West Adolescent Survey that our females are more likely than males to be stressed out. Our females have two times more likely to have symptoms of anxiety versus our male students. And then we can also see that our LGBTQ youth are more likely than our heterosexual youth to report mental health problems. Youth with disabilities, that's both physical and learning disabilities, are also reporting more mental health problems as well. And those statistics are by and large similar at the high school and at the middle school. Finally, last part is thinking about school incidents and school discipline and knowing that not all of our students feel a sense of belonging and support. We can see that some of our low-income African-American, Black, and METCO students are overrepresented in documented discipline cases relative to their population. I think that these last two statistics as well are really important in just thinking about 10% of grade 10 students report having been teased or picked on more than once because of their race or ethnicity. And 16% of our grade 10 students with a learning or physical disability have been teased or picked on in school, and that's what they're reporting. So I think that this also shows that our inclusivity work is embodying multiple different types of identity, that we're not just looking at race, we're not just looking at sexual orientation, we're focusing on gender, we're focusing on ability, and that we're trying to look at all aspects of the ways in which our students can be different.
Thank you. As a reminder, when people have questions, if you could put them in the chat and direct them to Kate McCarthy, she's going to be collecting them all at the end. In terms of the research, people have asked, what does the research show in terms of DEI having a positive or even a negative effect on students of all ages? DEI work, there is no one recipe. There is no booklet that the Department of Education or anybody hands a school district and says, here, go and do this. It's step-by-step, 180 days from grades K through 12. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. What you need to do is do what Denny was just referencing, is look at data, both qualitative and quantitative, and say, where can we improve, and then work in those areas. So while we are not able to pull up one empirical study that says this works and do this, and this doesn't work and don't do that, instead we've thought as a community, based on our data, based on the findings of the equity audit, what are 3 areas where we can do better? And what does the research say about those 3 areas, being belonging, student engagement, and then culturally responsive teaching. So again, you'll get copies of these slides. All of these data points and research articles are also in the frequently asked questions. We'll make sure you have a copy of those as well. So you're welcome to click through and read as many as you'd like. I will take a moment just to read a few. I'm not going to read you all the articles, but I did pick some things that I think are really important to note, and I do want to take the time to say them aloud on air. In an article, A Caring Climate That Promotes Belonging and Engagement, it says, we have known for years that social, emotional, and cognitive processing are all neurologically intertwined. When students of all ages and stages feel they belong to a community, they're more likely to thrive, and students don't learn as much when they feel uncertain about their belonging. These conclusions don't apply to just a select few. They cross income levels, ethnic and racial backgrounds, geographical differences, and gender identities. From a different source, Structures for Belonging, here are some of the research-based practices that people have asked for, and you'll see that these are the research-based practices we are looking to implement. The article says, research-based opportunities to systematically support every student belonging include increasing access to learning environments by ensuring equitable access to accelerated or advanced coursework, and eliminating exclusionary and equitably applied discipline practices in favor of more supportive approaches. Another strategy, supporting relationships with educators, peers, and families by helping educators to develop critical consciousness, engaging students in collaborative and small group learning opportunities, and welcoming students' families as educational partners with valuable expertise. Another strategy, utilizing instructional resources and pedagogy that counter negative stereotypes and create cultural continuity by instructional activities that draw on students' experiences, use collaboration and exploration, and are relevant for communal goals. And lastly, attending to system level policies and practices to communicate respect and support for every student, ensure the equitable use of resources and access to information, and engage students in system level decision-making. So again, those research-based opportunities that they're talking about are those that you see in our goals. In terms of research that supports student engagement being that students are excited about the learning, they're interested, it speaks to their strengths, their backgrounds, their prior knowledge. An article from Stanford, Why Engagement Matters. Engagement has been much heralded in the literature as an important driver of school achievement, as well as a critical antecedent to understanding the material and acquiring these skills. In addition, engagement has been found to be a proactive factor, buffering youth from risk behaviors and unhealthy outcomes. Studies find that engaged students are less likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, and less likely to experience internalizing symptoms, including depression. Engagement also has been linked to well-being and life satisfaction. Because it has been associated so strongly with valued academic and non-academic outcomes, engagement has attracted growing attention from educators, policymakers, and philanthropists seeking to invest in reform strategies. Another article by Denise Pope from Challenge Success, Keys to Meaningful Learning. Researchers who study meaningful learning, I'll skip ahead, our research shows that engagement is not just related to academic success, but that it's also related to student well-being. It turns out that schools that prioritize both student well-being and engagement with learning help to support students' academic success, as well as foster vital skills such as collaboration, critical thinking, and resilience. And the last important part of our DEI work is around culturally responsive teaching. So again, articles you can reference afterwards from how racially diverse schools and classrooms can benefit all students. Research shows that the mere inclusion of different perspectives, and especially divergent ones, in any course of discussion leads to the kind of learning outcomes, for example, critical thinking, perspective taking, that educators, regardless of field, are interested in. A growing body of research suggests that the benefits of K-12 school diversity indeed flow in all directions, to white and middle-class students, as well as to minority and low-income pupils. For instance, we know that diverse classrooms in which students learn cooperatively alongside those whose perspectives and backgrounds are different than their own are beneficial to all students, including middle-class white students, because they promote creativity, motivation, deeper learning, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills. These skills that students gain from diverse learning environments are in line with what policymakers say should be among the primary focuses of K-12 education. They are also skills that are highly desired by employers. In addition, there's a pedagogical value inherent in having multiple vantage points represented in classrooms to help all students think critically about their own views and to develop greater tolerance for different ways of understanding issues. It allows for positive academic outcomes for students exposed to these diverse viewpoints. And more recently, attention has pointed to the role that diverse schools play in preparing students to live in a multicultural society, particularly in terms of promoting interracial understanding and comfort, friendship building, and fostering civic and democratic engagement. Further, a longitudinal study on the link between K-12 and post-secondary exposure to diverse learning environments showed that the positive relationship between diversity in higher education and outcomes related to satisfaction, well-being, and racial attitudes are stronger among students who had already had experience with the diverse learning environments before college. Now we'll go to the how. How are we going to accomplish these things?
Great. So yeah, we've spent some time now looking at the what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've looked at the why. Now just thinking about the how. So how is this all going to play out? What are the actual actions that are going to be taken? What changes might people see? And I think sometimes this is the part that makes people nervous, because when we just talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we don't talk about how it's actually going to manifest itself in our schools, that can lead to a lot of fear, that can lead to a lot of misinformation. So we want to hopefully give people the information in these next slides about what this actually is going to look like. So in terms of teaching and learning, again, I'll just kind of breeze through this. One of the things that we are going to be doing and that we have begun engaging in is a curriculum audit, so that we can think about the representation of specific perspectives, voices, and identities within our curriculum materials, but also getting back to a lot of those things that are raised about Portrait of a Graduate and Challenge Success. When we're looking at our curriculum, we're also focusing on how we can give students more choice and voice and agency in their learning, how we can hold all of our students' high expectations, and how we can make students connecting what they're learning in class to real world skills. So our March 30th forum is going to focus more on curriculum, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this curriculum audit process at some upcoming school committee meetings. In terms of our high expectations, we want to continue to be clear with students and families about about the information that they have about the types of courses and challenges academically that are available to them. Sometimes there's some information that needs to be more clear about how students can change levels, what types of courses students have access to. So we want to make sure that we're communicating that. And I said this in our last forum as well, just to be clear, we are not trying to get rid of advanced placement courses. We are not trying to water down our advanced placement courses or honors courses. We are not trying to get rid of honors courses and have all heterogeneous courses. We don't see those as changing, but we're just going to continue to try to provide as many opportunities, and like we said earlier, with equity, to give all of our students what they need so they can access all those opportunities and those high expectations. So in terms of professional development, we're going to continue to do some needs assessment with our staff about what type of professional development they need, not only around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, but how we get students to do those things that I just mentioned about high expectations, connecting their learning to the real world. And again, specifically thinking about how we can retain the diverse staff that we already have, how we can recruit diverse staff, so that our students can see all of those different identities reflected in the educators and the adults that they work with on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. I'm going to cover the next few slides. And again, I'm Kate McCarthy, Director of Student Services. So to start with student support, a lot of these points have been talked about already and have been things that we have had in place really to look at supporting all students. We've continued to support through our social, emotional, and academic programs. We have been able to grow our social emotional programs so that we have a social emotional home-based program in every single school in the district. And we have also added counseling support across every single school year in the last 4 years. I've been here to really meet the needs of all students. And we also have been supporting staff in order to accommodate for all learners and have the ability to accommodate as they see fit through our district curriculum accommodation plan. This is not a new piece that has been developed. It's been in place for the one that we've been working on has been in place for about 4 or 5 years. And we've really been looking at it and making sure that it meets the needs of all learners. We've also been developing and expanding our interventions for all students across our MTSS model, which I know I've spoken about at a previous school committee meeting as well, but looking at making sure that all students receive supports, students who maybe have disabilities, but maybe students who are excelling and need things to advance. And so really to make sure that all students are getting what they need. And also, as Denny had just said, looking at really our educators and making sure that we are keeping and attracting highly qualified staff and also diverse educators so students can have that experience. And then also looking at multi-tiered systems of support. Again, this is something we've been working on for many years and will continue to grow and create robust systems to support students through interventions. Now we have school culture. So positive school culture and making sure that all students, again, this is a lot of what's already been covered tonight around feeling they belong and feeling that all people in the community feel like Dover Sherborne is a place that they feel valued and respected. And also, I know this has been a question that we've received a few times, but knowing how to report things that happen, things that are seen, things that are experienced. And that is something that we communicate to families. And we are also working on additional ways to make sure that families know that they can, and students know that they can anonymously report anything that's seen and experienced. So that's been a big piece. We also have thought about scheduling events and things that happen around religious and cultural observances. This was something that we also just met upon at the school committee meeting and are having a task force that's looking at that specific piece to make sure that all things are considered. We also have in the future, we will be also continuing to look at how we support students who have had some kind of event happen and how we're working to restore, it's called restorative justice, it's repairing, and to look at things in a way of how do we learn from events and not necessarily just provide a disciplinary action. We're also looking at anti-bullying curriculum. We've been researching, we have bullying curriculum in place, and I'm looking to expand the curriculum up through all the grades, and all looking at our social emotional learning curriculum that we have. Responsive classroom, we have things in place, and always looking to see how we can expand and offer more things to all students. And then I again said a little bit about this already, but we really are, there's a lot of things that have shifted as far as student discipline, as far of laws, but now we are really looking at protocols for how we respond to bullying, how we respond to events that happen, bias-based incidents, and really making sure we have protocols that we also are clear with and communicate out so that families and staff and students all know kind of the response and how we deal with events. And also just making sure that kind of all the things around discipline, there are things that we protect confidentiality, and we protect everyone involved when there's a disciplinary action, but also sharing what process we do follow. So being more communicative and having a lot of that information in the handbooks. We have been looking at the handbooks all year this year, as that was something that was recommended and something that we do every year as a practice. And we are critically looking at those. We've been working as an administrative team and really branching out to all faculty, and we'll definitely be presenting some modifications on the handbook this year. And we will also be looking at ways that pre-K through 12 we respond and support all students that are struggling in any way.
Thank you. I'll take the last few, this being around community engagement and the importance of engaging families as part of the work with our kids. And tonight is one example of that, of providing information, but we also want to engage in further conversations and question and answer sessions and planning and strategic planning sessions. As you know, we've enlisted Dr. Hoyt to work with us. We are a very lean district in terms of administration, and having Dr. Hoyt be available to help us facilitate these conversations, to communicate information and be transparent with families has been just phenomenal. Many of our neighboring and comparable districts have hired full-time DEI directors. We don't intend to do that. Instead, we are hoping that DEI is just kind of embedded in the way that we approach teaching and learning every day. So the community conversations will continue. We'll share our philosophies and practices and areas as we move forward. And on the slide, you'll see that some of the ideas and areas of interest that came up in previous forums, that some of which we're covering tonight and others will be covering in future events. And lastly, important to everyone in our district, students, educators, and parents, is the idea of this growth mindset. And certainly as adults, we want to model for our kids that we are lifelong learners, that we continue to grow and get better and learn and find new things curious. So we want that as a goal of our graduates, to be lovers of learning and want to go out and just continue to be inspired and do amazing things. And I think as a district, we need to model this as well, in that we are an excellent district. We are a top rated district in the state and in the country. And in order to maintain that status, we need to continually to reflect, look at data, and continue to grow in our practices moving forward. That said, many of the data points that Denny covered early on in this presentation are the same data points that we'll be using to monitor as we make small shifts in growth in how teaching and learning looks here in the district. We'll be using these data points to make sure that we are meeting the goals and expectations that we have set for ourselves as a district. So I won't go through them again. Some of them are academically based, some of them are social emotional data points. And of course, student voice and feedback, as I'm always reminded, anytime I get to meet with kids, talk with kids, see them learning, are such invaluable pieces of information too, just about the student experience, what's working well, and what we can do better. Last year was our first ever Dover Sherburne Schools annual report, which came out electronically. It was roughly 15 pages, I believe. Each of the 4 schools were highlighted. The goals of the district and the schools were highlighted. There were several data points within them. So in terms of moving forward, we hope to continue this tradition of an annual report that will continue to show you the amazing teaching and learning and academic excellence that Dover Sherburne is founded upon, as well as the data points that will continue to show that we're monitoring and adjusting as necessary. A question that has come up quite often is, how much does all of this cost? So as we went through those 8 slides, Denny, Kate, and myself, in the right column, you'll notice that it referenced the budgetary implications. Many of these items already exist in our operating budget. So things that are related to curriculum or supplies, the student programming and the personnel changes and positions that we have that Kate mentioned, professional development, educator recruitment are already accounted for in our budget. So there'll be no change there. In terms of grant funding that we currently have or that is coming either from the state or other agencies, that'll recover training for the restorative justice practices, continued work with our student leaders in a multiple of areas, as well as our work with Dr. Hoyt this year. The only 2 expenses that we have at this point in planning, and this is an evolution, are around the SEL curriculum and the anti-bullying curriculum that Kate mentioned in her presentation. Both are mandated by the state, so there will be some expense related to those, but certainly nothing insurmountable. So next steps.
Next steps. And you go ahead to the next slide, Beth, please. So next steps, we're going to take a few questions to respond to some of the questions that were submitted in just a moment. But part of the process of answering questions and continuing our conversation is completing the feedback form. I think I've seen that Denny's already put a link to the feedback form in the chat, so please access that. The more feedback we get, the better we can respond. Please contact district and building leaders with any questions that you have. Please, I implore you, be in touch with me if there's anything we might be able to discuss. And again, it doesn't have to be positive stuff. I'm always happy to talk with people about concerns. And we have another community forum coming up, as I think was mentioned, Thursday, March 30th, where we'll focus on curriculum. And we hope that a lot of people show up for that. As I was checking the participation list for this webinar, at one point we were up to 132 people, which I think is just fantastic, that folks found time to express interest and be on board. So thank you for that. The other thing we want to say before we take a few questions is that a lot of the questions that are being asked are also being answered. There's a growing repository, multiple sources of ways to get your questions answered. We hope that folks will check into some of these to see if something that's on your mind is already being addressed in one of these categories of responses. And we'll continue to update this, and you can see what's new because it'll be labeled new. So with that in mind, let's take a few questions. And team, I'm going to read the questions or a cluster of questions and just see who's in the best position to respond. I am taking the next 3 things I'm going to ask as I think a cluster of questions that have to do with the handbook and concerns possibly about bullying and reporting incidents. So I'll read each question and then see who might want to jump in. First question, what is the status of the student handbook being updated per the recommendation of the NYU audit So that's one. I think that question might tie to the next one, which says, what is the status of developing a system for students to report incidents of racism and bullying per the recommendations of the NYU audit? And then the third question, which I'm guessing is connected, what is the immediate plan of action to educate and discipline students, teachers, and parents who engage in these activities? So I'll stop with that question and see who amongst us might want to address any part of that or the whole thing.
I can start. I know I had mentioned some pieces around, there's an annual review of the handbook that we will take part in as well. And the other piece that we will be looking at through some of the suggestions around each of the policies. We will be continuing to do that with school groups and parent groups and our own leadership teams. And we will also be thinking about how we can make the handbooks really consistent across each of the 4 buildings. So those were some things that we had been tackling. And so it's in the process, and it's a process that we will be engaging the community for as well. That's around the handbook piece. I don't know if Beth, you have any added.
Sure. And, I think one of the recommendations that was in the audit is just making sure that the handbook is very clear and logical for anybody, students, teachers, parents to follow. And so the consistency that Kate mentioned in terms of, rejiggling our handbooks to make them user-friendly across all 4 buildings is certainly a goal of ours. Kate mentioned developing additional systems for students to report incidents that we can follow up on. We had an expert meet with us a few weeks ago about what that might look like. So that's certainly something that we want to put in place. In addition to maintaining relationships, we want to make sure that every child has at least, if not multiple, trusted adults in the building that they can reach out to during the school day or via email, or parents can reach out to express concerns that need to be followed up with. And then in terms of disciplining anyone engaged in these acts, as we mentioned earlier, there are certainly things where harsh consequences will continue, certainly around, hate crimes, hate incidents, fighting, those things that won't change. And we want to have that educational piece too, not only for the people involved to understand, what are the ramifications of using certain words, what are the ramifications of certain actions, but for those who witness it too, so that everybody knows that this behavior won't be tolerated and that we are a community that's going to support each other, stand up, and move forward.
Thank you all. I'll just add that I hear in this cluster of questions, perhaps, a desire to know that there will be some accountability. And even if I'm just speaking for myself, and I know I'm not, I think our efforts to try to make anything we do in terms of behavioral response educational includes accountability. Accountability is a type of learning, about what the world expects from us. So everything from nice conversation to restorative justice to serious discipline is part of the learning process. A comment question. Many Medco students have to get on their bus at 4:30 in the morning. If they play a sport, many Medco kids will be home after 7. Could this affect their academic success? Is there any way that this could change so that Medco students can have better school-home balance? I will say before I turn this over to the team, as a former kid who got up super early and came home super late, going back and forth to DS, it certainly had an impact on sleep and just time spent sitting on buses versus doing other things that some of my peers were doing. And I think this is a really important sort of example of the difference between increasing diversity, having different sort of folks in our community, and not being completely included as are other kids. There's inequity in the way that these folks get to move through the community. So certainly if that's the case, I know we want to work on that, but let me pause and give the team a chance to say what we have done, what we might do, and how we're thinking about that issue.
Sure. So certainly we know that in order for students who have the first Medco bus pickup at 5:45, they have to get up very early in the morning, which is in the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock range. And that's certainly not something that we would want for any child. Through the start time shift, we did look at the potential of having 2 buses so that our secondary Medco students could have the later bus time and the later start time, as well as their peers here in Dover and Sherburne. In meeting with the students, the high school students at that time and even recently in talking about the benefits of having a later bus and potentially sleep versus also, looking at traffic patterns of what happens later in the morning and how long it's going to have them get here, certainly is something that we have to weigh out in addition to, how to support the finances of a second bus, which again, if that's where we land and need to move forward, we will. And we are also thinking creatively about the time that our students are here in the buildings when they arrive. They do arrive here quite early because their the high school and middle school kids start later, but their elementary counterparts have to be here earlier for the early start time. So how can we use that time to either give them an opportunity to rest, an opportunity to study, perhaps some support from teachers during that time. And I would also like to just, give it a plug for the family liaison program. I know when my own children, my biological children, were at Pine Hill, we often hosted Boston students overnight when it was time for field trips or when it was time for open houses. I know that happens at the middle and high school around sports. And I think that's something that we need to continue to consider. And we are open to options. I don't have all of the answers right now, but it's certainly a good point. And we do want to make sure that our Boston students do get the rest and the support that they need to fully succeed as well.
Thank you, Beth. I see us moving up towards 8 o'clock. We'll take at least one more question. But I also want to assure you, and I know I speak for the team, that all the questions that have been submitted, we'll find a way to turn back answers to them or point you in a direction where you can find the answers. Next question. How does DS plan to hold itself accountable for diverse hiring practices, including racial, neurotype, and LGBTQ diversity?
So I can jump in a little bit on this one. I think one of the most important pieces that we need to look at first is our diverse staff that are already within the district. Why were they attracted to Dover-Sherborne, and what is keeping them in Dover-Sherborne? So I really want to make sure that before we try to recruit diverse staff, that we're figuring out the ways to keep the existing ones that we have, figuring out what is going to nurture them and what is going to keep them in our district. In addition to that, we're part of the Massachusetts Partnership for Diversity in Education, which is a group where we have access to a lot of great job fairs that attract diverse candidates. We have data and we have statistics to hold us accountable to these, to share about the diversity within our teachers and our educators. And I'll say too, as somebody who is diverse, a lot of it is thinking about ways that we can let people know what kind of community Dover-Sherborne is. And if it's a community that is going to be welcoming and nurturing and supportive of staff with diverse identities, and making sure that we're getting that information, that message out to the larger teaching pools might dispel some of the hesitations they might have about working in Dover-Sherborne or thinking that it's just this, homogeneous, upper class community. The more that we can really explain to people what the community is all about, I think that will be one of the biggest selling points to getting more staff with diverse identities into the district.
Thank you, Denny. I lament that we don't have more time to go through some of these questions and have our discussion. But as we are at 8 o'clock, I'd love to pass it to you, Beth, to give you a chance to say anything you'd like to in terms of reflection and closing and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I would just like to thank you, Carlos, for facilitating, for Kate and Denny, for all of your continued research and support of our students and presenting all of that here tonight. I'd like to thank everyone who came and everyone who is going to watch this video moving forward. Again, the intent here was listening to the needs of the community. We needed to get the information out there. So I'm sorry this was chock full of talking at you, but there will be opportunities to engage in discussion again now that the information about the how, the what, and the why is out there. Please, again, as Dr. Hoyt mentioned, reference our questions and answers. They're up to 40. Many of the questions that we didn't get to tonight, if they're not already in there, we will make sure that we fold in and get that link out to people. And as Denny shared, the exit ticket or the feedback form, please feel free to ask additional questions there. That will have your email in it, so we can respond to you directly with the answers to that information, as well as include them in the frequently asked questions for the benefit of all. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your support of this work. We are always open to conversations. Call us, email us, come in and talk to us, talk to your building leaders. We really, hopefully, are all on the same page and wanting to do what's best for our students and continuing to maintain the excellence that brought all of us, my husband and myself included, to this district to raise our children. So thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.
I think it might still be recording, Beth. I'm not sure. I think I see the button still on.
Thank you. Hang on.